Dzień dobry, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming and welcome to this press conference on whether Georgia is still on European path with Mr. Jacek Saryusz-Wolski, Vice President of the EPP Group in the European Parliament, Mr. Giga Bokria, United National Movement International Secretary, and Mr. Georgi Kandelaki, Deputy of the UNP. Mr. Saryusz-Wolski, the floor is yours.
Coming from the debate which is still on about Moldova's association, and as you know, we are having our Georgian file for December plenary, the same type of first discussion, debate, and then ratification or the consent procedure for the association agreement with Georgia. But the moment has come when we have reasons to ask the question, is Georgia still on its European course? On behalf of my party and group, I have to say that we are increasingly concerned by the recent political instability in Georgia, which is applying more and more selective justice. It was applying selective justice towards its opposition, which is represented at this table on a visit to Brussels, UNM, the party of Mikhail Saakashvili, but now does the same to its former, until very recently, coalition partners of the Free Democrats, of former already Defence Minister Lasagna, former Foreign Minister and former Minister for Europe. This is a very critical juncture, and we want to stress that it is of key importance to respect the values and commitments as they are enshrined in the association agreement, which we are about to ratify. We want to underline and to recall that any kind of relations with the European Union of our partner countries from Eastern Partnership, be it Georgia, be it Moldova or Ukraine, has to be based on the respect for European values and principles like democracy, freedom and the rule of law. And we were very clear on that while tackling the Ukrainian issue. You may remember the stumbling block in our relationship, which was the detainment and jailing of Yulia Tymoshenko. And the same is the case for Georgia to a much higher degree, although in a different political context. Around us there is not what we have expected, a ring of friends. There is a ring of fire, and the fire is being put by Russia. By Russia, who is applying aggressive and warlike invasion methods to prevent and to deter our partners from making their legitimate European choice to choose partners for economic or political relationship. So we consider that those repeated trials, arrests, pre-trial detentions, I cannot even mention, but my colleagues from Georgia will give you the names, how many former ministers and deputies of UNM are now in prison. But all those arrest trials, detentions of political opponents make us think that this is an abusive use of justice as a political instrument of retribution, and this is something which goes contrary to those commitments and values of the Georgian state to be an associated partner country of European Union. Even more, the recent declaration by President Margelashvili, coming from the camp of Ivanishvili and the Georgian Dream, suggests that the country is being ruled from the backstage, which means outside of the democratic control and oversight, and this raises further our concern. All that will be reflected in the debate and eventually in the report on Georgia, which will come next before the end of this year. At the same time, we want to recognise that Georgia has made unprecedented progress and civilisational jump in the last decade. It has become a truly European and modern country, and these achievements should be consolidated further and not wasted as it happens now. Our group is concerned by the changes in the Georgian government, and those changes, all of pro-European, as such considered ministers leaving, or being kicked out of the government, that raises the question of credibility of this European commitment of the Georgian government. And the question of this press conference is Georgia still on its European course? So we appeal as a party, as a group in the Parliament, but we'll put those questions into the resolution further on of the European Parliament, urging the Georgian authorities to refrain and stop all those bad practices which put under question the credibility of its European commitment and respect for its obligations, and asking for refraining from any kind of political prosecution. At the same time, we do hope that all the pro-democratic but at the same time pro-European forces, those who are in opposition and those who were until yesterday in the government, they will work together in order to preserve the European choice of Georgia and of association of Georgia with the European Union. So to conclude, I want to say that the EPP supports ratification of the association agreement, has doubts and questions and concerns, and this support is based on the assumption that Georgia remains committed to European values, obligations and to the European cause. So it is not unconditional support. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to welcome you all and like to use the opportunity to thank Mr. Saryusz-Wolski personally and EPP, a family of where we as a political party belong, for its continuous and critical support of Georgia's European future, its sovereignty, its democracy. I think it's been a key element which has helped our country to move towards our historic goal of going back to European civilization, rejoining the free world. So I think it has been appreciated, it is appreciated. We come here at a very critical moment. We all observed yesterday, today, that more Russian tanks are pouring into Ukraine. I think it's pretty clear that this battle is a historic battle for further enlargement of the free space towards our region, where Georgia is part of. It's Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and further. The next months or year can decide whether this historic dream of my nation and many other nations will be fulfilled or postponed further. And I think the Georgian nation made a clear choice how to respond to Russian aggression, and the response is to go quicker towards European integration and to do its best to transform the country inside into European democracy. The association agreement which the Georgian government has signed and which will be at the ratification of the European Parliament very soon became a very symbolic document due to primarily developments in Ukraine and Russian aggression against Ukraine. It's a very important document, but even more important than a particular document, which have many important benchmarks inside, is a civilizational choice, a choice of a real political system inside the country. It's not a foreign treaty, the association agreement. It's rather a benchmark of real European path of Georgia. And what is our primary concern now is that while we welcome, and as a political party, call on all forces in European Parliament to ratify the association agreement, because, again, because of its highly symbolic importance in a given geopolitical context, and because the Georgian nation deserves a further step towards Europe, it's even more important that we reverse an extremely worrying trend that we are observing the last 2 years in Georgia, when after the first peaceful transfer of power, something of a historic importance also for Georgia, when the first case of government being voted out, which is a necessary prerequisite of any liberal democracy eventually, we see a new government rejecting the next fundamental principle of democracy, that the losers in elections are able and have entitled rights to continue to compete in a democratic society and don't go to jail by the virtue of being defeated in elections. We have seen a continuous application of selective justice, use of pretrial detention, and pre-declared political cases by highest-ranking officials against the main opposition party, which is United National Movement. nearly the whole leadership of the United Nations movement is either in pretrial detention, convicted, under investigation, or in exile. Up to 100 key former government officials and current opposition leaders are under investigation. Several thousand have been questioned. And this all happens in the context of a rise of political violence and violence against minorities, impunity towards those violent acts, and a clear picture of selectiveness when people who would refuse to challenge the new government or who would switch the sides would find the cases against them dropped. Now, there were some people who thought that UNM concerns, or even concerns of our partner parties, were caused by the mere fact that it's our leadership which is prosecuted. And it's natural that for any political party who considers that this is a political process to raise its voice when their leaders are prosecuted. But we've been saying for a long time, and unfortunately it has been proven right, unfortunately, that this is not a problem of one political party, even if it's the biggest opposition party. This is a problem of the new government of Georgia and ex-Prime Minister Mr. Ivanishvili, who still controls the government, rejecting the fundamental principle of democracy that opponents have a right to challenge the government. And now we arrived at the juncture when parts of its own coalition, where we all know that there were open tensions, and Mr. Ivanishvili have been publicly critical of Mr. Lasagna for a long time, have turned its wrath against its yesterday's coalition partners. We have now the same pattern of pretrial detentions of individuals, classified cases which lawyers cannot access, and cases which government officials, classified cases which government officials talk in detail prior to any judicial process and convicting their new opponent in a court of public opinion and violating the presumption of innocence in a most transparent and demonstrative manner. In addition, and I will finish with that, we are extremely worried by the rhetoric which is very typical of the country north to Georgia and was alien to Georgian democratic practice, when there are conspiracies found whenever there is criticism voiced of the government. We have heard statements by Prime Minister about Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden, National Democratic Institute, and all of them have been labeled as part of the UNM conspiracy or some conspiracy to undermine the government. The NGOs have been labeled to be subversive, and now former coalition partners have been labeled as traitors and UNM stooges. This is a very dangerous rhetoric, coupled with even much more dangerous actions to imprison the opponents. This endangers Georgian European future, because the future of Georgia is not only about signing a very important document, which I underline support, but about real and substantial transformation. Because if this civilizational choice is not fulfilled, it will have immediate geopolitical consequences. A road to imprisoning political opponents leads to Putin, eventually. Thank you so much.
Just very briefly, I wanted to touch upon the geopolitical context of these concerns and what it really means on the geopolitical map. I think one lesson from the Ukrainian experience the last couple of years is that, as Mr. Bakradze said, the democratic backsliding has geopolitical consequences, and the one who benefits from this backsliding is Mr. Putin. And I think by any meaningful measure, what we see in Georgia is a full-fledged democratic backsliding, is a full-fledged but gradual dismantling of a democratic political system. Also, we have a number of dynamics in place that are beneficial to Russia, to Mr. Putin, that sees the strengthening or proliferation of democracy as a threat. We have a number of Russian or pro-Russian camps and forces very much activated, both outside the ruling coalition and inside, and now with this departure of pro-Western components of the Georgian Dream coalition, these forces are very much empowered and further empowered. They dominate parliament, for example. They consist of former communist high officials who, with a very high probability, cooperated with KGB. We also have already a concern of infiltration of the national security apparatus of Georgia by individuals with very questionable affiliations, let's put it this way, and this trend has been observed by a number of interlocutors. We have a rise of often violent anti-Western groups that try to undermine pro-Western, pro-European public opinion consensus by utilizing various issues, conducting pogroms against minorities, and often these groups enjoy direct endorsement and support of the government, and Mr. Ivanishvili in particular. Mr. Ivanishvili, who, as you know, is no longer Prime Minister, the fact that he controls, he is the power holder, an individual outside a constitutional framework, that's also a major systemic problem and a grave threat to democracy. I think with this recent surge of selective justice against members of the Georgian Dream Coalition itself, this problem has been once again highlighted, that Mr. Ivanishvili is the decision maker. He spoke in length about a classified case against Mr. Alassania's associates, cases that are officially classified, and even lawyers cannot access this case. And Mr. Ivanishvili discussed these cases at length on TV, while legally he has no right to access these cases. So the good news, and let me finish with the good news, is that whatever is said here in European Parliament and by Georgia's friends who have helped Georgia to remain steadily on this course, nobody can ignore these messages because of the public opinion consensus, pro-European public opinion, and the fact that the main opposition party, the UNM, sort of criticizes the government from the pro-European perspective. So actually what can slow down this backsliding are the concerns here, and we're very grateful for the support. So even Mr. Ivanishvili, who is non-committal at best to Georgia's European future, cannot ignore this, and the only thing that can stop him are these concerns. And without stopping Mr. Ivanishvili, I think we risk to see continuation of this backsliding. Thank you.
What I want to add is that until recently, EPP was skeptical on the credibility of the European commitment of the, let's call it, Ivanishvili government. And it was alone when we have been criticizing the political and judicial persecution of UNM. The situation has changed because the same fate now is shared by the, until yesterday, in the government, Free Democrats. And on this line, on criticism of Georgia's practice or credibility of its European cause, we have been in opposition with our partners from this parliament, from liberals and socialists. At that critical moment, we appealed to social democrats, to the fraction, and to its real leader, which is Mr. Martin Schulz, to rethink its attitude and support for the Ivanishvili government. And we appealed to ALDE and to Mr. Verhofstadt, with whom we will engage in talks, to not only rethink, but to withdraw ALDE's support for the Ivanishvili or Garabishvili, whatever, government in the situation when one of the ALDE parties left and is being persecuted and accused, as it was mentioned, I mean the Free Democrats, and the other liberal party is still in the government. And if it is still part of the same family, I think the Republicans, who are at the top level represented by the head of the Georgian parliament, Mr. Zupashvili, should also follow the same line, should perhaps think about joining their liberal colleagues from Free Democrats. And this should be also tackled by the European liberals and ALDE party. So we ask social democrats of this House to rethink, and we ask our liberal colleagues to withdraw support. Because until recently this support was sending a wrong signal to the society of Georgia, the signal saying, in spite of the departure of the most pro-European reformist force from the power, which was UNM of Mikhail Saakashvili, the European cause is still kept, and the European cause is still valid and credible. If you just listen and believe what Mr. Alassania and his Free Democrats say, they say that the European cause of this government is no longer credible, no longer justifiable, and no longer should be considered as such by the Georgian citizens. And that should make our social democratic colleagues here rethink, and our liberal colleagues to probably, hopefully, change their attitude. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time literally for 2 questions. Are there any, please?
Anna Sujewska, Polish Daily Rzeczpospolita. I have a question on to Mr. Saryusz-Wolski on this so-called pro-European stance, whether it's still there or not, because it starts to resemble the situation in Ukraine when the mainstream in the EU believed Yanukovych and thought that he's still on the EU path and made many mistakes. Are you drawing any lessons from this experience with regard to what the EU should do with Georgia? And on the same issue, but slightly different questions to the members of Georgian opposition, why do you call for the ratification of association agreement with this government? It will finally be the signal that this is the EU path. Thank you.
Okay. Druga część pytania.
Let's take the second part of the question. We are associated with the nation, not the government. 80% of the Georgian nation is pro-European, and that is why we believe that association is something we need and we support. Yet we do have doubts. We have doubts, reservations and fears. We have learned lessons from Ukraine. We call what's happening in Georgia the Yanukovychization of Georgia. On the one hand, it looks like a pro-European path, but it's not. It's all smoke and mirrors. The EU is being deceived, the Georgian nation is being deceived, and that's what we have to say. What we need to see is something much more credible than what we've seen up to now. Lasagna was part of that project before. Now Lasagna is saying they cannot be part of that project. That makes our reservations credible. It's not really for me to explain the circumstances of Lasagna's departure. That's for our Georgian friends. But there were certain facts which hard facts which could have been Moscow inspired. Georgia was put before a choice towards the West or not, and that led to the Georgian Free Democrats' departure. So yes, indeed, we are learning lessons, and I don't think we should repeat our mistakes. We shouldn't have a fake association and a semblance of democracy. We have fully understood the mistakes we made over Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Because of the votes, we have to finish the press conference. Okay, still one question.
About why do we still support? I think Mr. Saryusz-Wolski from his side responded to that. I would say for us, as a democratic and pro-European opposition of Georgia, this is about the country first. And an additional specific reason is, again, how the events unfolded in Ukraine, and that the association agreement, which again is basically an important but technical document, has highly symbolic importance. And I think the Georgian nation deserves to go further on this path in a package with what we already said, that the signature and ratification of this document will be followed by a very legitimate and tough scrutiny of substance of European democratic transformation in Georgia, and would not repeat the same mistakes which were done at some stage in Ukraine when mere statements were taken for granted. The road towards European civilization is not about statements on foreign policy, technical choices. It's about what happens inside the country, and that's a challenge for Georgian society. And Georgian society, with the help of our friends in Europe, will force any government in Georgia eventually to go where we need for our democratic future.
There's one sentence I want to add. If 80%, as we are told, of Georgian society makes the European choice, and if this government is not pursuing the European cause, this government is no longer legitimate. And in a situation where the government is not legitimate, the democratic answer is clear. Give voice back to the people. Thank you.
Just two sentences, and Ukraine is really an important test for explaining what's happening in Georgia in many kinds of ways, the path that the government has undertaken. Yanukovych also was saying, I'm for Europe, when Yanukovych was trying to justify prosecution of his opponents, and we have higher scale. This prosecution in Georgia is much higher scale. He was also saying, it's the rule of law, you know, I have nothing to do with this. So we hear same arguments in Georgia. Yanukovych also made the national security system of Ukraine immensely vulnerable to Russian threats and infiltration. We are seeing the same trend in Georgia, weakening of Georgia's national security system and posture. And finally, the conduct of Georgian government on Ukraine itself is a very important illustration of the trajectory that Georgia has taken. We have lip service statements that we support Ukraine and so forth, but in real life, Georgian government has, I would argue, de facto recognized Russian sphere of influence over Ukraine. What do I mean? First, the Georgian government has opposed sanctions on Russia, which is unthinkable for Georgian government. Georgian interest is to be part of the same package and part of the reasons why these sanctions are imposed on Russia. Withdrawal of Russian troops from Georgia should be featured in these sanctions, we believe. Second, no high-level trips to Ukraine for 2 years. No prime minister, no foreign minister of Georgia have visited Ukraine, which is also a very important trading partner for Georgia, for 2 years in bilateral format. Even once. Third, speaking on various international forums, Georgian government is trying to decouple Georgia from Ukraine. On BBC World, the Prime Minister is asked, so what about parallels, Crimea, Abkhazia? He says, nothing in common Georgia has between these problems. Georgia has achieved Georgia has constructive dialogue with Russia, says the Prime Minister. Georgia has achieved golden mean of relations with Russia, and Ukraine should learn from us, says Georgian Prime Minister. We think it's not only immoral, but it's pragmatically very damaging for Georgia.